In order to better understand many of the retouching tools in Photoshop, we need to learn about the brush tool. This is one of the most fundamental parts of using Photoshop, and even though you might think you wouldn't need it for photography, you often do, especially for retouching. So we've practiced a little bit with it, we've learned some of the basics. I just want to run over it again and go into more depth and then explain how you can kind of customize the brush tool and make it your own. So let's open here, let's go to the brush tool, and I'm gonna make a new layer on top of everything. We'll just name this brush. Brush. And now we'll paint on that layer, and anything we do on here will not affect these layers beneath. We can turn it on and off like that. In fact, let's go ahead and turn off these layers, and we'll just work with the brush tool on its own layer. So I'll get rid of that little thing that I did. The reason I want to explain the brush tool is because many of the other tools, no, I'll explain that later. Remember that when you're selecting your colors to use with the brush tool, you can go down here, and whatever is right here in this little box is your foreground color, and that's the main color that's going to be used as you paint. The background color is going to be shown right here, and if you want to switch them back and forth, you could click on these little arrows or press X on your keyboard, and that'll flop the foreground and background colors. So if I wanted to, I could go ahead and paint with white on here, and you can see that. If I push X again, switch them, and then let's say I go on and I customize my colors here. I make this bright red, and I make my background color bright green. And I've been painting with them. And then I want to go back to pure black and pure white. You can just press D on your keyboard and it'll set that. Remember, that's the default colors. So if you press D, it'll go back to the default colors for your foreground and background colors. So let's delete this layer. It's fun to just doodle around and play with the brush tool to get a better understanding of it. So feel free to do that. And just remember that you're not painting on any layers that you actually want preserved. Make sure it's on a blank layer. To adjust the size and hardness of the brush tool, we've gone over two ways of doing that so far. We can go up here, go to size and drag it up, go to hardness and drag that down, and now we can see that we've made adjustments to how the brush tool looks. If I make the hardness 100%, you can see that that's updated here. If I wanted to adjust the size of the brush tool without opening this, I could click on my left and right bracket keys. You can see my brush is expanding and growing there. I could shrink it down. If I want to adjust just the hardness, I can use on the same keys, but pressing Shift, go to the brace keys. And let's see, the hardness of this brush right now is at 100%. So if I go to the left brace key, bring the hardness down, you can see that it's changed right here. And now if I paint, you can see those changes. I brought it all the way down. I can bring it up there, somewhere in the middle, or I could bring it all the way up to 100% hardness there. Those are super useful keyboard shortcuts to use to adjust the size and hardness of your brush, but there's another one that's actually even easier. If you, on your keyboard, press Control Alt, and then right click, you can drag outward, left and right to adjust the size of your brush. You can drag up and down to adjust the hardness of your brush. So if I don't want to have to deal with this or any of these keys, I can just press Control Alt, right click, drag to the left to decrease the brush size, drag up to decrease the hardness, and then start painting with my new brush there. And these changes that take place, you can see them in that little box right next to the brush on your screen. If you'd like to use this trick on a Mac, I'm on a PC right now. On a Mac, it's Control Option and then click and drag, and you don't have to right click on a Mac. So Control Option, click and drag on a Mac, or Control Alt, right click and drag on a PC. And lastly, let's take a look up here at the brush toolbar. We have the brush options here. Then we have our brush settings. So this will just open up your brush settings box. And you could also open that up by going to Window, Brush Settings. Then we have a mode. Remember, this is the blend mode that your actual tool will be using. So if I wanted screen, and then I change the color to a light pink and paint over this, you can see how those changes are taking place by using the blend mode for the specific tool up here, rather than changing the blend mode of your overall layer. Next to the blend mode settings, we have opacity. So I can change the opacity, bring it down, and that'll just change the opacity of each individual brush stroke, or rather the opacity of the brush tool as a whole. Remember, it's not affecting the layer opacity at all. So this can be useful if you want to get really specific with how you're using the brush tool. Remember, if you press a number on your keyboard, it will go to that percentage. So if I press 5, it'll go to 50% opacity here. If I press 0, it'll go to 100. Next to opacity, we have flow. Flow is kind of like choosing how much ink you want to come out of your brush, or how much paint you want to come out of your brush. So if I have 100, it will paint fully and very clearly. If I bring the flow down, you can see that it lets out less paint as I use the tool. And then if you go back over an area that was painted with a lower flow percentage, you can see that in these areas, I've gone over with the ink twice, and so it becomes more and more opaque. So it's kind of like painting, but with less paint in your brush, and then you can go over multiple times to add more paint to the area you're trying to affect. And lastly on here, we have smoothing. So I'll bring the flow up. We have smoothing here. So if you take a look at my brush, if I drag it across the screen here, it takes a minute for it to catch all the way up to where my cursor is. If I bring the smoothing down to 0, you can see that it updates exactly in real time. But take a look at the difference between these strokes. Might be a little hard to see, but you can see that these ones are smoothed out a little bit more. As I paint, the little inconsistencies in my brush stroke are kind of like minimized when I have the smoothing at 100%. At 0%, there's no minimization of that, and whatever you paint is what you get. So if I bring my brush hardness up to 100%, I paint with a smaller brush, you might be able to see this a little better. There's smoothing at 0%. You can see that exactly where I clicked and dragged the brush is where it painted. If I bring the smoothing up to 100 and do the same thing, you can see that we come up with a much smoother line. Those little inconsistencies or human errors that I've made as I painted are minimized with full smoothing. And then you can go in between and find something that works for you. So if I turn it on to 37, you can see that it allowed for a little bit more inconsistency, a little bit more of those tiny adjustments that I made, rather than looking at the overall brush stroke and kind of merging that together to make it more smooth. So that's smoothing. Play around with these and all the different settings for the brush tool to see how you like to use it and get comfortable with it. And in the next video, we'll talk about how you can load some more types of brushes.